Listening to his albums back to back and hearing the progress from single to album to single to single to album, suddenly you get into the early weeks of 1964, and the work is so much more vivid and so much more detailed and intricate. The arrangements are getting that much more complex, and he's doing it all with Phil Spector's sonic tricks and his ability to kind of create these amazingly explosive sounds.
It was sort of an infantile music. It was kid stuff, so to speak. It wasn't sophisticated. We didn't realize how far out it was. And of course, in the beginning, we weren't hearing the vocals. We were just hearing the sort of almost a working track. That's what we would hear. And until we heard it on the air, my God. And all of a sudden it was #1 in the world. The whole world is playing these records that we did, bit by bit by bit. I'm sure that not only impressed Phil Spector, probably infuriated him too, because Phil couldn't stand that anyone else could have the capabilities that he had.
Fun, Fun, Fun has everything. Everything you would ever want in a Beach Boys song. It has a catchy hook, it has great vocals, it has a driving beat, the instrumental sound that you associate with the Beach Boys. At the end it has the signature Brian Wilson wailing counter melody. The layered ending is something you hear in full bloom in Fun, Fun, Fun. There's the wail, the Brian Wilson wail, and then you have some other voices just going, fun, 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 tell my daddy, da, 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 da. So all that is just going on at the same time. There's no greater depiction of a sort of swirl of activity and a sort of celebration of life than that kind of layering, I think. It all goes back to the counterpoint in Four Freshmen, and so if you take that counterpoint from a typical Four Freshmen song and then just add a little bit of a rock and roll beat and then expand it to add this sort of embracing of life, then that's where you end up. It's Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys.
If Fun, 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 with its Chuck Berry guitar and freshman harmonies, represented the apotheosis of the early Beach Boys sound, there would be little time to rest on the achievement.
Rock and roll was sort of back into the limelight already, you know, and then when the Beatles came out, it was like, okay, you know, England is really uninfected by the House Un-American Activities Committee. And they're uninfected by, you know, we can't play these records in the South because they're by black people, and all these other, you know, things that were inhibiting rock and roll during the early 60s.
And whatever had happened before that, it just seemed like, okay, we have to rethink it all. Like, who's going to be still around after this? And, I mean, the term British invasion gets tossed around, but it really felt like that. I mean, every week there was a new British group on the Ed Sullivan Show. You know, there was the Beatles, then the Dave Clark Five, and then the Rolling Stones, and then the Animals, and the Searchers, and Manfred Mann. It just seemed one after another, this endless series of bands. There was a new phenomenon. And, you know, pop music, certainly back then, was just all about that. You know, here are the haircuts, they're English. You know, all of that really counted. And suddenly, they're from California, they're singing about surfing, just didn't seem that important. It seemed, you know, it seemed irrelevant.
The guitars didn't have tons of reverb, massive reverb like surf music did. They were just sort of in the room, present. And they were different kinds of guitars too. They weren't the Fender solid bodies. They were these like Gibson hollow bodies and Rickenbackers. So it took a minute to get used to the music, the way it sounded, because it was so foreign.
You know, I think we probably just thought we were the ones. The Americans, we kind of held all the cards. And then to see the press that came along with these great British recordings, and to hear the accents and see young people with different architecture around them that we had here. I think Brian had a little bit of competitive spirit about it. I think we didn't. We just thought it was totally cool. You know, I always used to think Brian must have listened to the Beatles records and go, I could do better than that, you know.
He thought the Beatles were going to wipe out the Beach Boys somehow, because it was such a furor when the Beatles arrived.
The impact on Brian was such that he quickly became ambivalent about the necessary business of completing Shut Down Volume 2, and the album appeared in March, at a notably lower chart placing than that of its predecessors. The Beach Boys' favoured status at Capitol was also quickly diminishing as the label lavished attention and resources on the Beatles.